Good afternoon, and welcome to the show, The Core Hour, sensible, sustainable solutions for our society and you. How's everybody in the room today?
Doing great.
Fine.
Great, beautiful Jazz Fest day.
Again, our number is 504-260-9265 if you want to call in.
And don't forget, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but don't forget to like us on Facebook as well to stay informed about the different events Core USA is having. So go to Facebook and Core USA.
All right. Our show is brought to you today by the Ibis Conservation Room. Can you lead a workshop, class, or seminar that fosters positive environmental, economic, cultural, or social change? The Ibis Conservation Room, located at the corner of Willow and Leonidas Street in the Carrollton area, 1401 Leonidas Street, could be the catalyst you need to promote and or further develop your products and services. For more information, visit us at 1401 Leonidas Street or online at www.coreusa.net.
Sounds good. And before we get much further, I'd like to introduce our special guest for this week.
Very special guest.
So we have my friend and fellow board member at the Louisiana Landmarks Society, Casey Stuart. Casey, thanks for joining us today.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
And let me give you a brief background on Casey. After Casey retired in 2003, he attended Tulane University and received his master's in the historic preservation program.
I know a few of those historic preservation folk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a nice little group
Decent folk.
Yes. And after that, I know, Casey, you were working with several nonprofits around the city, including the, Save Our Cemeteries, correct?
Save Our Cemeteries, yes. I was on the board of Save Our Cemeteries and vice president of education.
Oh, right.
And then I went over to Louisiana Landmarks Society to fill an unfulfilled board term. And before I knew it, I was second vice president. The first vice president resigned, and I got to be first vice president. And I was talking to the chairman of the board development committee, and I said, you really need to pick out your president for next year. We're getting close. And she just looked at me, and she smiled, and she said, we have, dear.
Congratulations. Well, let's see. I think everybody really should know about the Louisiana Landmarks Society if they don't know already. So Can you talk about a history of the Louisiana Landmarks?
Can we? I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt, but I wanted to get in.
Okay.
The Ma'at meditation. We started doing this last week.
Yes.
And, because this is lunchtime and because, during lunchtime, a lot of Americans, unfortunately, don't stop. They eat right through lunch and, they eat in the car on their way to the next meeting. And so we want you to
sandwich and drive at the same time.
So we want you to slow down and meditate from time to time. So if, we're going to give you, 2 to 5 minutes to talk about Ma'at meditation. Again, Ma'at principles, the 42 laws of Ma'at are inscribed in the pyramids. You can look them up for yourself. There are a lot of different websites that have the 42 laws. And they actually have different translations of the 42 laws on different websites because they're in hieroglyphs. And so different people have their different interpretations of the 42 laws. But the 30th principle or law of Ma'at in this, this is the 18th week. So the 18th Ma'at meditation or the 18th Ma'at principle is, I have not been an eavesdropper. Keep your nose out other folks' business, as your grandmother might have said back in the day, is basically, and keep in mind, y'all, these laws that we're talking about are over 3,000 years old. They're inscribed in the pyramids. And so even way back then, I have no idea how many generations that is. What is that, like 1,000 generations or 100? Three? What? I don't know the math on that. But it's a lot of generations. So way back, our ancestors were telling us way back then, do not stick your nose in other people's business.
So let me ask you this. Listen to radio shows, and a lot of radio shows have, like, Today in Gossip or the Rumor Report or something like that.
There?
So you
Why
telling
did
me
I know you were going there?
You telling me if I listen to that, I am possibly breaking the 18th law?
Now, see, here's my thing, okay?
Okay.
Now, you're not supposed to answer a question with a question, but let me ask you this. Were you invited to that conversation by the people whose information is actually affecting?
No.
Okay. So, if you happen to be on a website where you're trying to figure out what Kanye West is doing with Kim, and Kanye West keeps looking in the camera and telling everybody, stay out my business, right?
Right.
You're probably breaking this law.
Fair enough.
You're probably breaking this law. And what do you think about this law? I mean, you as the preservationist, right? There are some folks who might say, hey, this building that is dilapidated does not need to be saved. This is right next door to me, and I want to tear it down. And who are you for sticking your nose in my business? So what would you say to someone like that?
Well, there is more involved than just individual rights. They're the rights of the community. And the community is part of the environment, as are the buildings. And we believe that the built environment should be sustainable, and many of these old buildings are sustainable and are much more able to be sustained than a new modern building in many cases.
Fair enough. I mean, this city obviously has a large French heritage, and I believe the French term for that is the tout ensemble.
The tout ensemble.
So
yes.
That's recognizing that, hey, it's not just about your beautiful building. Your building is part of a community.
It is.
Right.
It is. And it is the total built environment in which we live. And that's why it is the business of the community when someone wants to tear down a historic building.
Okay.
So it is our business as a society,
yes,
to conserve our cultural legacy and our cultural treasures in our community.
Well, especially here in New Orleans. And if you wanted to not be philosophic, but to be practical, we have, I think the mayor's goal is 13 million visitors to New Orleans within the next 5 years. That's the target. And people come here to experience the built environment. And, when was the last time that, unless they have family there, that somebody took a fun-filled vacation to Cleveland? People come here for an experience.
And they usually get one.
And they usually get one. And many people are looking for many experiences. But there are a lot of tourists that come here in order to experience the French Quarter or the Marigny or the Treme.
The magic that is New Orleans.
The magic that is New Orleans. Thank you. Thank you. But you asked me before about the Louisiana Landmarks Society.
Yes.
The Louisiana Landmarks Society was founded in 1950 by a group of concerned people. They were not preservationists necessarily at the time, but they turned out to be very significant to the saving of the history of New Orleans. People like Sam Wilson, Jr., who was a professor, a noted architect in New Orleans, and with the firm of Koch and Wilson, and Leonard Huber and Martha Robinson, and I'm just afraid I'm going to run out of all of the names and I'm going to insult somebody.
It's okay.
But there was a whole group of people who were quite alarmed at the proposed destruction of the David Olivier House at 4111 Charter Street. And this was an ancient plantation house. It was one of the plantations that went down the river, and it was in danger of being torn down, and it was torn down. They lost that fight.
Wow.
The next year, there was a college up on St. Charles Avenue that was an African American college, and unfortunately, I'm old and my mind is slipping on the name.
We'll find out and we'll post it on our page.
But it was on the corner that De La Salle High School was built on, and it was that was the second loss. Then after that, we had one of our first wins, and that was when we saved the Carrollton Courthouse.
Wow,
the Carrollton
thing's in danger again.
Repeating itself.
It is.
Right?
History is repeating itself once again.
And when was that you saved it originally?
This was in about 1951.
Wow.
And the school was being sold, or the courthouse was being sold as surplus property. And we...
Sounds familiar.
We went in and we did a campaign to save it. And it was our first win. We saved that building. And
wow.
They moved Ben Franklin High School into it. It's also been Lusher, and I think it was another charter school since then. But that school has since left, and the building once again is vacant. But back in 1951, they wanted to tear it down to build an A&P so that they could have an A&P across from the Winn-Dixie that was in the shopping center across the street, and we were able to stop that. Since then, we have worked on many projects. The society is 65 years old, and one of our projects that we're very proud of is the saving of the 1799 Pitot House on.
I've been there.
On the bayou.
On the bayou, on Moss Street.
And a lot of people don't even know the cultural history of that place. Can you just tell us a little bit about...
I can. The Bayou St. John area was the first area in the city that was settled. It was the first pieces of property were given out in 1708, which is 10 years before the city was founded in 1718. And the reason that it was founded on Bayou St. John was that that's how you got here. You came in through the Wrigley's, in through Lake Pontchartrain, up Bayou St. John, and that was the beginning of the portage, which was an old levee system that the river had established by its meanderings through the area. And the ridge, the Esplanade Ridge, was the portage that the Indians and the early settlers would use to get from Bayou St. John, where they were able to come in, to the river, because the river at the time was silted up from centuries of the normal flow of the Mississippi River.
Sure.
And so it was almost impossible to find a way in to the mouth of the river at the time. And it wasn't until Eads was able to invent the jetty that he put the jetties in, and the river flushed itself out, and the river kept the mouth open so that then commerce could come up the river, and that's when the river really.
So can you talk about specifically about the history of the Pitot House?
Yes.
And who built it?
The Pitot House was built in 1799, and it was the home of Mayor James Pitot. And I know that there are people out there who are saying he's mispronouncing that name because most people pronounce it Pitot. But actually, it's a Norman French name, and we had at a function at the Pitot House within the past year the patriarch of the Pitot family and his family there for the function. And I asked him, I said, "Sir, how do you prefer your name? How does your family want its name pronounced?" And he said, Pitot.
Okay.
And so, that was, I thought, an interesting part. But the Pitot House was on that property and had many owners and ended up as in the ownership of the missionary sisters of Mother Cabrini. And they operated Cabrini High School. And they wanted to build their new high school on Bayou St. John, on Moss Street, and the Pitot House and another house were slated to be torn down to make room for it. And the Louisiana Landmarks Society at the time, and this was in 1964, went to the sisters and begged them not to tear the house down, and the sisters said, "It's got to go. If you want it, you can move it." And the board of trustees at the time appealed to the city, and the city gave the Louisiana Landmarks Society a long-term lease on a part of that little park, and they moved the Pitot House over to that position in the mid to late 60s.
Okay, so the Louisiana Landmarks Society has been the stewards of that property
Yes.
since then. So
Yes.
people may be asking, okay, you saved buildings in the 60s. Maybe they should really understand, hey, this is what not the Pitot House, but this is what the Louisiana Landmarks Society does now.
Yes.
For instance, I know that there's 3 parts: education, stewardship of the Pitot House, and then advocacy.
Yes.
And a big part of your advocacy is the New Orleans 9 list that you put out every year.
It is.
So can you talk about some of the projects, some of the buildings that have been on that list in recent years? I'll give an example, for instance, St. Roch Market. So that way you can talk about, hey, this is what we've
Sure.
done in recent years, and look at what's happened now.
Sure. And anyone interested in viewing an entire list of the properties that have been listed on the New Orleans 9 most endangered sites can go to the Louisiana Landmarks site at louisianalandmarks.org.
Great.
All one word. And you can view things like the Professor Longhair House, which we put on the list, I think, 3 years ago, and it has been restored. And, in fact, we were honored to be able to give it one of our new Louisiana Landmarks Society awards for excellence in preservation to the Professor Longhair House.
And how did that happen that you put that on the list?
Well, we open the list. We open we give an invitation for submissions, usually in January, and we have a committee of people in the community, not mostly Louisiana Landmarks Board people, but we have people like Sally Reeves, who is the archivist for the civil courts, and Sally has an encyclopedic knowledge of history and buildings in New Orleans, and we have people like Danielle Del Sol, who is she has a Master of Preservation Studies, and she works for the PRC. So it's a group that we put together every year to determine which buildings go on. We've had buildings like Carver Theater on our list, and we all know how beautiful the Carver Theater turned out.
It looks amazing.
Yes, we have named a number of buildings on O.C. Haley, for instance, and the name of the school is escaping me, but it's a wonderful big school
Sure.
on O.C. Haley that burned, and they had the iron framework up holding the walls up, and it's now going to be a grocery store, very much needed.
And so you
in
continue
that
to advocate for properties like this,
Yes.
and you're
Yes.
relentless about it until those properties are saved.
Yes. Gallia Hall, for instance, after Mayor Morrison built his dream Duncan Plaza with the new City Hall, which we all are very familiar with now,
Right.
and the State Office Building and the Supreme Court, the city had no apparent need for Gallia Hall, and there was a move to tear it down because it's just an old building. Why not tear it down? And so we went into action and we saved that. And we have designated to date a total of 90 properties as endangered here in the city.
And it's usually 9 per year.
9 per year,
So
yes.
that's 10 years. Is that right?
That's 10 years,
Awesome.
yes. We've been doing this for 10 years. And last year, we decided that, maybe it appears to be a little negative that we're only talking about the endangered properties. And there's so much wonderful restoration going on in the city of New Orleans today that we decided we would give awards for outstanding preservation efforts.
Sure.
And
that's awesome.
And we started that
A little
last
positive
year.
spin.
Yes,
the solutions, right?
The solutions,
Exactly.
yes.
So you're identifying the problems.
Yes.
You're identifying the buildings that have challenges and that are in danger of being lost forever.
Yes.
Because, a lot of people don't say that, but when you lose a historic building, it's forever.
A piece of history is gone.
And as a building scientist, let me just say that, building scientists around the world are still learning from the technology from years ago with these old houses. So if we can, the more we can preserve these old buildings, and you even talked about the cemeteries, we're still learning from these old cemeteries with these raised monuments and so forth. We're still learning. And if we lose these structures, they're gone forever.
And not coming back because we neither have the resources nor even the technology to rebuild some of these old buildings. A very famous architect in the United States named Carl Elefante was quoted as saying that the greenest building is one that's already built. And if you stop and think of the energy that goes into building a building, Mike, you're an architect.
Right.
There's a tremendous amount of materials. There is the energy of the people that build it.
I like it when he starts talking like that.
And so when you tear down an old building and haul it off to the dump, you're hauling very valuable energy off
I
to the
wish
dump.
someone from the Green Project or from the Preservation Resource Center would call in. Maybe we can have them on the show soon to talk about the 100-year-old, 200-year-old. It looks like we have a caller calling in, too, so we're going to need to check that line. But, these historic, very important materials, heart pine, heart pine, longleaf pine lumber that's in the dumpster. This is 300, 400, sometimes older lumber that is in the dumpster. And that stuff sells for sometimes $10, $12 a linear foot. And so if you throw away a 2x12 piece of lumber that's hard pine out of one of these old building folks, just know that, let's say that thing was 12 feet long, right? You multiply that times $10 or $12, and that's how much money you just threw in the trash can. And it's organizations like yours that keep that conversation. Let's jump to the caller real quick. We have Eric on line 3. Eric, are you there?
Yeah, God bless you. How you doing?
Hey, Eric.
Good,
What you got?
you. Yeah, I understand saving the precious materials. Now, does the Preservation Society and those type of organizations, does it limit the spirit of human growth in terms of creativity and innovation, because I feel like it would squeeze out opportunities for innovative designs and innovative buildings and creativity, because something else has to be preserved that's been around and it's had its opportunity to be in existence for centuries. And to me, does it squeeze out new opportunities?
And that is a very important question that comes up, it seems like, in every meeting about conservation and preservation, the old versus the new. And so what does your organization feel about that?
Well, the challenge posed in an old building that's in bad shape is not so much can we tear it down and build a building of lesser quality, but the challenge is posed to the architects and the developers to take that older building and make something valuable of it again.
To retrofit it,
retrofit it.
With new technology.
Yes, and all one has to do is go see the buildings on O.C. Haley that have been restored, and the St. Roch Market, as you mentioned before. And I mean, it just adds considerably to the neighborhood.
Now, I feel like these organizations get a bad rap as being what people call an obstructionist, where they're always just saying, no, you can't do this, when really they're pro saving and then adding to the culture, because you can't freeze the city in 1900 or 1930.
Now, I'm going to have to give just a little, and I'm not, Eric calls into the show. I keep hearing him calling into the shows on WBOK. He's very introspective, and I'm going to have to play devil's advocate on the side of Eric, because I have been in meetings, and I'm a preservationist at heart, okay? I truly am a preservationist and a conservationist at heart. But just to piggyback on what Eric is saying, I have been in several meetings in several parts of the city as well as parts of the world where there are dilapidated buildings that are public nuisances in our communities, where people are using these things to hide illegal substances and illegal weapons. People are using them to commit crimes. And also there's just a broken window effect, and it brings down the value of our communities. And so sometimes there are developers or business owners who say, hey, I can take that land because, there's very little land in this community, and I can take that land and build a new building. I just can't afford to pay to redevelop this blighted building. And, I'm not trying to speak for you, Eric, but there is this conversation where at what point do we say, no, developer, you cannot remove this building, or yes, developer, you can actually remove this building if you're going to do something that improves the condition of the community. How do you approach that as an organization? Eric, am I helping you out with that, or am I hurting your question?
That's a good point too. But I guess I'm the type, I like to see new, innovative things that I haven't seen before. And
so you like the Make It Right houses down there?
Yeah, to me that's interesting to me. And what's been seen it's had its time. It's had its place. And to me, in order for society to grow, you have to allow new ideas and new people have their chance to do what they were sent here to do in life.
It's an interesting. Go ahead.
And to me, the preservationist thing, to me, it stunts human growth and development, and to me, it limits people's potential, because one group of people wants to keep what has been done, while to me, that's what I ask, does it limit other individuals their opportunity to fully grow and develop as a designer, as an architect, as an engineer, whatever it may be?
Very interesting question.
Well, all of restoration requires designers and architects, and to be done well, it requires designers and architects and skilled laborers, tradesmen, and I like to look at it as everything in life is in balance. And when development becomes too fast, or if people are moving into development and wanting to tear down vast tracts of land, I like to look at our function as one of balance and having people stop and think thoughtfully about the development and what is going to take place, and challenging them to be even more creative in saving these old buildings, which are in many cases much better built than new construction.
Awesome. So it's a very, very interesting topic. We're going to slide right into the break here. And when we return, we're going to talk about the solutions. We've talked about a lot of problems, a lot of challenges to conserving our culture, our cultural resources. After the break, we're going to come back and talk about the solutions that are provided here with the Preservation Society as well as Core USA. And other folks, if you want to call in after the show, please do 260-9265. We'll be right back.
WBOK 1230 AM, New Orleans.
Welcome back to the Core Hour, sensible, sustainable solutions for our society and you. We're back talking about historic preservation in our wonderful city. Before the break, we were talking about some of the concerns that folks were having about new innovative strategies for construction. People want to see more of that in our great city. And, the question that was posed was, is historic preservation sometimes getting in the way of that? And I personally, again, as a building scientist, I personally believe that there is an opportunity for both. I really get excited when I walk into a historic structure. And I can kind of get a sense when I'm approaching the building of what it would have been like 100, 200 years ago, walking into that exact same building. Probably my ancestors walked into that exact same building through that exact same threshold and probably felt the same way I did when walking in that building, because some of these buildings really represent the deep cultural, social history of our communities. For instance, historic churches. I go to a church over in the Carrollton area, and it was built over 100 years ago. Historic St. Paul AME Church. And every time I sit in those pews and I look up at the different elements that were built way back when, I try to imagine what it was like, what the people actually were thinking and feeling when they carved that cross and screwed it to the wall, or on the exterior when they put up that cornerstone that had everyone's name in it, and they all took that photo op, right?
Right.
You always got the famous photo op by the cornerstone in front of churches after a new renovation. And so just that experience, when I start thinking about preservation, I start saying, if we don't continue to preserve, we're going to lose these experiences. And when we start saying things like, well, this area used to be a plantation, right? A lot of folks say in different neighborhoods, there's no way this used to be a plantation. All these houses built. Nah. But when you have the actual plantation there,
yes,
right?
Yes.
You can say, no, this building used to serve as the plantation for this entire plot of land, which is now a new neighborhood, and this is what it used to be like. Maybe, hopefully, you have some old sketches from a Harper Weekly or something that says this is actually what it used to be like in this particular neighborhood, like in Pigeontown, for instance, where you can tell young black people who are fussing and fighting over, what they don't have today. And you can say, well, actually, your ancestors were slaves in that same area, in the same neighborhood where you currently live. And so maybe you need to think about that the next time you decide you don't want to take advantage of education that you're now being provided that your ancestors didn't have access to.
Exactly.
It starts to really put things in focus when you have that cultural history there that's evidence that this prior existence was real.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, preservation saves the sense of place that we have here in New Orleans. Tennessee Williams, the writer who gave us Streetcar Named Desire and many other wonderful books, was quoted one time as saying that there are only 3 cities in the United States, New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
All the rest is Cleveland. Now, not to disparage poor Cleveland, but
twice the show.
Twice in a show, yes. And,
sorry, Cleveland.
Cleveland is a wonderful city. But when you go to cities like Cleveland and Omaha and even Dallas and Houston, many times if you were brought there blindfolded and had the blindfold removed and looked around, you couldn't tell what city you were in. That problem is not existent here in New Orleans.
Oh, yeah.
Or
when
New
you're
York
in New Orleans,
or San Francisco.
You know exactly where you are. That's true.
And
that's very
the
true.
Destruction of the built environment is the destruction of our heritage and our culture. And, yes, there were slaves on these plantations, or as they say now, correctly, enslaved people.
Okay.
Many of these people were skilled artisans and craftsmen.
Yes, they had to be.
They had to be. In fact, there was a large population that came over from Senegal, and these were master builders. And you would tell the master builder, I want a building of 15. And he would take his crew out into the forest, and he would fell timbers and dress them in the forest.
And you can still see the saw marks in a lot of that old lumber.
You can see the saw marks. You can see the mortise and tenon where the peg from the end of one timber fits down into another, and they're pegged together. Those buildings are still standing.
And there were also free people of color who built these, like Madame John's Legacy in the French Quarter.
Absolutely.
Beautiful old buildings. And Madame John's Legacy in a historic building in the French Quarter, it's my understanding that place was built by a free person of color. It was designed and built by a free person of color. And also, there were no nails used
pegs
in the building. There were pegs used in the building. So, things like this, if our young people are exposed to things like this and they're told these stories and they're really able to put things in perspective that, hey, even in a time of slavery in the Deep South, you still had free people of color down here doing amazing things, like designing and building something as fantastic as Madame John's Legacy.
And we always talk about sustainability with environmental, social, cultural, and economic. I mean, that's tying everything together.
That's tying it all in.
You talked about technology, for instance. It's not necessarily new technology. It's things that people don't know how to do anymore. You have these beautiful old wood windows or doors on a building, and you can't find anybody to correctly rebuild or renovate these doors and windows. And if you do, you're going to pay a lot for it. So if we had people that said, hey, I'm going to learn this trade, there's 1,000 houses in my neighborhood that need work on their wood windows and doors, you're making money.
And I never understood that. Workforce development is probably in New Orleans, in my opinion, one of the most critical pieces to the pie and to the solution. And there are very few organizations that have the capacity to truly train not just young people, but older people too, who are looking for new jobs now that the economy's changing, the market's changing. And so folks who may have been working in one particular market for many years and retired are now looking for a new market to work in. And we have all of these blighted buildings. We have all of these vacant lots. And there are very few people who are trained to be able to do that work. But if we could just become the center for preservation in the city of New Orleans through your organization, through the efforts at the Pitot House and educating people about older structures, through the Preservation Resource Center, even the mayor, Mitch Landrieu, when he first got into office, he had a transition task force that he put together for blighted property and redeveloping blighted property. If one of the focuses that came out of that was a training organization that specifically taught folks how to preserve old buildings, like they tried to do at the Preservation Resource Center with what's the organization that Tim was working with? It was I think it was the Prince Wales Institute.
The Prince of Wales Institute.
Yeah.
The PRC was working with them, but also there was the Priestley School, which was a wonderful concept.
Now see,
that is home. That's right in the Carrollton area.
It is.
Man.
It
Right
is.
down from Core USA.
And the purpose behind the Priestley School, as it was originally found, not the original Priestley School, but the Priestley School of architecture and
you're touching the soft
and crafts. This had a tremendous opportunity to do good for people.
Tremendous opportunity.
I've bemoaned for many years the loss of skilled tradesmen. That, there just doesn't seem to be a focus on training people to do the building trades that we so desperately need.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that the
the answer I always get is money. The answer I always get is we don't have enough money to do that.
The philosophy behind education seems to be that everybody should go to college. Well, not everybody should go to college because some people are not interested.
I wish we were in church so I could hear everybody say amen.
Yes.
Because this is such a critical point in our society. I say all the time that education is critically important. I went to college. My kids are 13 and 15. I'm encouraging them to go to college. I encourage every person I approach to go to college, right? But that should not be your end-all, be-all. And if you're having a difficult time getting into college initially, like I did, don't give up and don't decide that that's the only thing that you can do. If there is something that you love to do, and I don't care what it is, you can find out how to learn to make money doing what it is that you love. And if you love these historic buildings, you do not have to focus solely on going to college. There are other resources out there. There are other people and organizations out there like Core USA. And I'll talk a little bit about a summer program that we're putting together to do just that, to educate folks on sustainable building technology, to teach them how to make money and build their own businesses in preservation technology, community building, organizing, and so forth. But there are plenty of opportunities for you to go out and intern. If nothing else, come talk to us. We'll link you up with a contractor, and you can just go out and learn from that person, right? You can be an apprentice.
Well, there's a wonderful plaster tradesman here in New Orleans named Teddy Pierre, who went to college, and yet he went back and he took up his ancestors' trade of plastering, and he's probably one of the best in the city.
Incredible resource. Yes. And he actually partnered with Preservation Resource Center in that initiative with the Prince Wales Institute.
Yes.
And taught a lot of folks, including one of my friends, Tim Adams, who finished that program, learned a lot about masonry and plaster and so forth, and is using it in his work as he works for the city right now.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
All right. Yeah, I'm just thinking about our different projects that we've all collectively worked on. Casey, I know you're rebuilding a house, renovating a house in the Bywater.
In the Maroney.
In the Maroney area. And I've walked through it. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. And you're taking the steps that you're talking about. I know you have, heart pine floors, and you're working on those.
And I have skilled craftsmen who are saving as much of the original fabric of the building as can be saved in order to make this building something new. And it's going to be a new creation when we're finished with it, without destroying the fabric and the tout ensemble, or the total view, as you mentioned before. It's part of the neighborhood. The neighborhood is kept intact, and many of my neighbors have renovated their houses.
Now, this brings up an interesting question. About specific, I was going to ask you, was that building that you're renovating, was it always a house? Because one of the things that I'm running into in various communities is the historic uses of the structure doesn't always match the new zoning of the structure. And when a commercial property, for instance, is now downzoned, and for those of you listening who don't understand what I mean to say that when you own a property, particularly if it's a commercial property and you want to bring back in a commercial use, like let's say you buy an old corner store, right? And you say, hey, I'm going to bring this back as a corner store, a corner grocery, right? Well, guess what? Most of the time you can't do it because of the zoning. The city will not allow you to go ahead and put a business back in the building where there historically was a business, and so you end up trying to be creative and maybe turn a corner store into a house, which I've seen several of, and I don't know how I feel about that.
Well, in the Maroney, we have what's called a Maroney overlay district, and according to this zoning, buildings that were once commercial buildings can once again be put to commercial uses with some restrictions. For instance, if you have a quiet residential neighborhood and there was a little corner grocery store, to put something in there, like an architectural firm or
something low impact.
Something low impact that is not a loud all-night bar.
Right.
Because
everybody wants a bar. I even want a bar. Everybody wants a bar.
And bars can be fun.
Right.
Unless you're sleeping 4 doors down.
Right.
And you can't sleep.
Right. We are dealing with, we literally just talked about that last show.
Week.
We literally just talked about that last show.
Yeah. So, getting back to preservation, I feel very strongly about it, obviously, and I don't want to see our city go away.
And by that you mean the cultural treasures of our city. You don't want to see them disappear. Because guess what, y'all? I wasn't born in New Orleans. I got here in 1999. When you said, we don't want our city to go away, it made me react because New Orleans ain't going nowhere. When I tell you, my people from Atlanta, I grew up in Atlanta. When I came down to New Orleans in 1999, as an Atlanta fan, right? Atlanta fans aren't the best. Okay,
That's what my my Saints fan friends tell me.
And so when the Falcons are losing, and you can see it even today, when the Falcons are losing, you look at the comments from Falcon fans, and they're all saying the same thing. These Falcons never going to get it right, blah, 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 get rid of them. When I got to New Orleans in 99, At that particular time, the Saints weren't doing too well, but y'all filled the stands.
That's right.
Y'all, I mean, this city loves its history, its culture, and it treats everything that is homegrown like family. And once you're family, you're protected by this city, spiritually, politically, otherwise. Once you're in, even, I'm going to say this too, Ray Nagin is loved by a lot of folks, even though he's sitting in jail right now. He's still in jail, right? He's still in jail. So, but people love him, you know, and he messed up, he made a mistake, but people still love him as a city. And so I'm just saying that to say that New Orleans is a place that if I was ever sure of a place that wasn't going anywhere, it's the city of New Orleans. Right after Hurricane Katrina, you had people from all over the world, specialists from all over the world, saying, I don't know if we should save this city again.
Right, and then right after that, you have people coming down, I mean, kids spending their spring break when they could be on the beach, coming down, helping
gutting out houses on spring break,
this city.
Helping rebuild the city of New Orleans because it's such a special place.
Even students from Cleveland that we've talked about.
From Cleveland, yes.
So this place is a beautiful place, and we need to serve every aspect of it we can. And to Eric's point, our caller from earlier, we still need to figure out how to incorporate new technology and while using some of the old materials and old technology as well. And I'm thinking of a few examples that I know of that mix in old and new culture beautifully through buildings. Like, for instance, you mentioned the Sanger Theater. If you go into the Sanger Theater, it's a beautiful place inside and out. You can see new technology incorporated all throughout that building, but it also respects the cultural history. You can see all of those historic elements. You can, do as I do and kind of wander back, 100 years ago and think about what it would have been like to be in there with some of the great jazz and musical artists who were in there performing. It's just a really great experience, and it is a mix of old and new technology. And on the residential structures, right, because we're getting close to the end of the show, on the residential structures, Eric brought up some of the Make It Right houses, and there's a lot of controversy around that. Are there any efforts to somehow come up with a contextual archetype, if you will, a way to teach architects who are not from here, as the architects who designed most of the Make It Right buildings weren't from here. And so when you look at those buildings, a lot of people say they look like spaceships. They don't look like they're from here. Are there any efforts to...
Well, the Make It Right buildings are fabulous buildings, but they're just, as you said, out of context. And that's what makes them so noticeable. Had their basic style and design fit in more with the neighborhood and the design of the buildings around it, it would have probably been more acceptable to most people. But I think that we here in the United States have to come up with ways of helping poor people to fix up their homes so that they are not substandard to live in and to raise their children.
And you see some examples of that.
Yes.
Rebuilding Together is an example of that, where they try to help people.
The PRC's program has been just spectacular down in the Holy Cross area, and I just wanted to put that little plug in for the PRC, the Preservation Resource Center, because they invested their treasure in the Holy Cross.
And there are also Habitat for Humanity as well.
And Habitat for Humanity is
they
another
do
wonderful
what they can
organization.
to try and help
Yes.
people who are in buildings who need those buildings to be renovated. They try to help them out with volunteers and so forth.
Yes.
And so you start to see some examples of that. But in those buildings, one thing I'm noticing is that if it's a historic shotgun house, for instance, whether it's the Preservation Resource Center rebuilding together or whoever, the Habitat for Humanity, Architecture for Humanity is another one that's out there trying to help people. What I'm noticing is that they're not using the historic materials to go back and renovate those buildings. And so what happens is you see these beautiful old shotgun structures, for instance, with 10-foot tall doors or sometimes taller, 8 to 10 foot tall doors or sometimes taller were the original sizes of the doors, and then they're going back with a 6'8" door from Home Depot.
Right. Yes.
And sometimes, in my opinion, that causes more trouble than good. I'm just going to leave that there because they're all doing their best, I'm sure. But my point is we can do a little better.
Yes.
And Mama B over there is looking cool, laid back,
Shades.
reserved, but she's in the house, y'all. I just wanted to put that out there. She's in the house again. Mama B. What you got to say? Anything? Nothing today. Okay. All right. But Mama B's in the house. Well, we're coming towards the end of the show, and I just want to say in closing, as we go around, we usually like to have a final thought at the end of the day as we go around, just something for everyone to remember as they make it throughout the day. Of course, I'm going to come back to eavesdropping. Okay. Which was our Ma'at meditation of the day. You should not eavesdrop, or you're supposed to say as a negative confession, you should be able to say, I have not eavesdropped. We had a very lively debate about that. What is your business? What isn't your business? If it concerns society in the whole, I think the entire group today has decided that it is your business and you should get involved.
I think so. And my final, thought of the day, I always like to end with gratitude. Casey, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for
You're a
inviting
great
me.
addition to the show to talk about the history and culture and advocacy for the Louisiana Landmarks Society. Again, if people want to learn more, or if they say, hey, there's a building in my community and I really think this should be saved and maybe put on the New Orleans 9 list.
Schools. Look at the schools.
How can they get in contact with Louisiana Landmarks Society?
LouisianaLandmarks.org.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. And what is your final thought of
Well,
today?
I just want to thank you for inviting me today and for allowing preservation to have a say for once. Usually we get shunted to the back of the room and have our microphones cut off.
Well, we know a little something about
speech.
being in the back of rooms and buses and so forth. So, glad we could bring you to the forefront. Thank you for being here as well. Mama B, I love Mama B's final thoughts. Come on, Mama B.
My final thought today is when you're in the giver seat, give from the heart. Don't give with the intent of having something to receive at the end.
Go
Good
ahead.
day.